The certified letter was sitting on my kitchen counter when I got home from work, and I almost tossed it in the recycling pile with the rest of the junk mail. I remember thinking it was probably a wedding invitation from someone I hadn't spoken to since high school, or maybe a tax document I needed to file. The return address was my parents' house in Millersburg, Ohio, that neat cursive handwriting my mother still insists on using, even though her hands shake now. I slid my finger under the flap and pulled out 3 pages of thick, cream-colored paper, stapled together at the top corner. My coffee was still hot. I took a sip. Then I read the first line. Dear Claire, this document constitutes a formal invoice for the total cost of your upbringing from birth to age 18. I actually laughed. I set the mug down on the granite countertop and leaned against the island, thinking this had to be some kind of joke, maybe a belated April Fool's prank, or one of those weird family newsletters my mom sends out every Christmas. But the paper was official-looking. There was a letterhead, Martha and Gerald Wheeler, Millersburg, Ohio *. Below that, a date. Below that, an itemized list. I read it 3 times before the words stopped blurring together. Item 1, prenatal care and hospital birth, $12,450. Item 2, formula and baby food, ages 0-3, $4,200. Item 3, diapers, wipes, and related supplies, $3,800. It went on for 2 full pages. School lunches, $4,600. Piano lessons, $6,200. Summer camps, $2,100. Braces, $5,300. The line items were precise down to the dollar, like they'd been calculating this for years, keeping a running tally in a ledger somewhere. I got to the bottom of the second page and my stomach dropped. Total balance due, $60,427.83. Payment in full required within 30 days of receipt. Failure to remit payment will result in legal action, including but not limited to civil suit and wage garnishment. Legal action. My parents were threatening to sue me. I set the papers down on the counter and stared at the wall for what felt like 5 minutes. The coffee was getting cold. My hands were shaking, so I gripped the edge of the granite and tried to breathe. I thought about all the times I'd told my friends how lucky I was to have parents who sacrificed so much for me, how they worked double shifts at the factory and the nursing home, how they'd gone without new clothes so I could have a winter coat that fit, how I'd paid for my own college tuition with scholarships and part-time jobs because I didn't want to be a burden, and now they were sending me a bill. I picked up my phone and called my mother. It rang 4 times before she answered, and her voice was flat, matter-of-fact, like she'd been waiting for this call. Did you get the letter? She asked. Mom, what is this? My voice cracked. I sounded like I was 12 years old again, standing in the kitchen of that tiny house on Maple Street, trying to explain why I'd broken a dish. This can't be real. You're joking, right? I am not joking, Claire. She said it like I was the one being unreasonable. Your father and I spent 18 years raising you. We gave up vacations, new cars, retirement savings. You owe us. I owe you. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. For what? For being born, you chose to have me. Don't you take that tone with me. Her voice sharpened. We did everything for you, everything. And now you're living in Chicago in that fancy apartment, driving that nice car, and you can't even help your own parents when they're struggling. I didn't know they were struggling. They'd never told me. Every time I called, my mother said things were fine. Dad's back was acting up, but the insurance covered it. The roof needed repairs, but they'd saved up. I offered to send money a dozen times, and they always refused. Keep it for yourself, my father would say. You earned it. But this letter, this invoice. Mom, you can't just decide I owe you $60,000 because you raised me. That's not how the world works. The world works however we make it work. There was a pause, and I heard my father's voice in the background, low and angry. Then my mother came back on the line. You have 30 days, Claire. I suggest you figure out how to pay. She hung up. I stood there in my kitchen, holding the dead phone, staring at those 3 pages spread out on the counter like evidence of a crime I didn't know I'd committed. The coffee was cold now. I poured it down the sink and watched the brown liquid swirl into the drain. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed and read the invoice again and again, memorizing the numbers. $450 for a used crib, $200 for a high chair, $1,200 for pediatrician visits. They'd charged me for everything, even the goddamn baby shampoo. At the bottom, in fine print, there was a note. Interest accrues at 8% annually from date of delivery. Delivery? Like I was a package. I thought about calling my brother, Derek. He still lived in Millersburg in my parents' basement, working odd jobs and playing video games until 3 in the morning. He'd probably think this was hilarious. He'd probably already known about it. I could picture him sitting at the kitchen table while my mother typed up the invoice, smirking behind his phone. But I didn't call him. I didn't call anyone. I just lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out how the people who brought me into this world had decided I was worth $60,000 in debt. By morning, I had a plan. I was going to drive to Ohio, sit down at my parents' kitchen table, and make them explain this to my face. I was going to look them in the eyes and ask if they really thought I was a bank account with legs. But I didn't know yet that the letter was just the beginning. I didn't know that the phone would start ringing at 6 the next morning and wouldn't stop. I didn't know about the insurance policy, or the gambling debts, or the foreclosure notice tucked into my mother's desk drawer. All I knew, standing in my kitchen with a dead cup of coffee and a certified letter that felt like a grenade, was that I had 30 days to pay $60,000 for the crime of being born. And my parents were dead serious. I grew up in a house where love was measured in silent sacrifices, and I learned to read the silence better than any report card. Millersburg, Ohio isn't the kind of town that makes it into magazines. It's the kind of place where everybody knows everybody's business, where the church potluck is the social event of the season, and where the factory whistle at 7:00 a.m. is the most reliable alarm clock you'll ever know. We lived on Maple Street in a house with peeling white paint and a porch that sagged in the middle, and I thought it was the most beautiful home in the world because it was mine. My parents worked double shifts, my mother at the nursing home on the night rotation, my father at the auto parts factory during the day. They'd pass each other in the hallway like ships in the night, my mother coming home just as my father was pulling on his boots. I was 8 years old when I figured out that if I wanted to see them, I had to schedule it. Breakfast with Mom before she crashed, dinner with Dad before he left for the night shift. So I became the one who held everything together. I woke my brother Derek up every morning for school because my mother was too exhausted to do it. I packed his lunches, turkey and cheese on white bread, no crusts, because that's how he liked it, and I walked him to the bus stop even when it was 15 degrees and my fingers went numb through my mittens. I made dinner when I was 11. Spaghetti with jarred sauce, grilled cheese with tomato soup, whatever I could manage without burning the house down. I did the laundry and folded the towels and made sure Derek did his homework, because someone had to. And I did it all without complaining, because my parents were sacrificing everything for me. That was the story I told myself. That was the story they told me. "We gave up so much for you," my mother would say, standing at the kitchen sink with her hands in dishwater, her back to me. "Don't ever forget that." I never did. I couldn't. School was my escape. I was the kid with perfect attendance, the one who turned in assignments early, the one teachers wrote "a pleasure to have in class" on every report card. I was in the honor society and the debate club and the yearbook committee, and I did it all because I thought that if I was good enough, smart enough, perfect enough, it would make up for everything my parents gave up. I got straight A's. I never asked for new clothes. I wore hand-me-downs from my cousin Rachel and didn't complain when the knees went thin. I didn't go to prom because the dress cost $200 and I knew better than to ask. I babysat the neighbor kids on weekends and put every dollar into a savings account I opened at the Millersville Federal Bank when I was 14, so I could buy my own school supplies and my own winter coat and my own goddamn shampoo. The piano lessons were the only thing they insisted on. $45 a week with Mrs. Kowalski, who smelled like mothballs and had a metronome that clicked like a heartbeat. I hated it. I wanted to quit, but my mother said it was important, that it was an investment in my future. So I practiced every day for an hour, my fingers stumbling over Chopin and Bach, because I knew that quitting would make me ungrateful. I was always so careful not to be ungrateful. I'd look at the sacrifices my parents made, the vacations they never took, the new cars they never bought, the retirement savings they never had, and I'd feel this weight settle in my chest like a stone. I owed them. I'd always known that. I just didn't know there was a price tag. When I got my scholarship to the University of Illinois, I thought everything was finally paying off. Full ride, 4 years, room and board covered. My mother cried when she read the letter. I still have that image burned into my brain, her standing in the kitchen with tears running down her face, holding the paper like it was sacred. My father shook my hand and said, "You did good, Claire. You made us proud." Proud, they were proud of me. That was all I ever wanted. I worked 3 jobs in college, the library, a coffee shop on Green Street, and tutoring high schoolers on weekends for cash. I sent money home when I could, just 100 here or 100 there, and I always told them to use it for themselves. They always said they didn't need it. "Save it, honey, you earned it." But they never cashed the checks. I found them later, in a shoebox in my mother's closet, all the checks I'd written over the years, uncashed and stacked neatly like an accounting of everything they'd given me. A list of debts they'd never collected. Until now. At 28, I'd built a life that looked like a success story. I was a graphic designer at a top firm in Chicago, making 6 figures in a city I loved. I had a 700-square-foot apartment in Lincoln Park with exposed brick and a view of the skyline, and I'd furnished it with pieces I'd picked out myself, a mid-century sofa, a walnut coffee table, a monster plant that I'd somehow kept alive for 2 years. I drove a used Audi and bought $8 lattes without thinking about it, and I thought I'd made it. I thought that was the end of the story. I'd call my parents every Sunday. My mother would talk about her garden and my father would grunt in the background while watching the Browns game. They'd ask about my job, my apartment, whether I was dating anyone. I'd tell them about campaigns I'd designed and clients I'd impressed, and they'd say, "That's nice, honey," and then we'd hang up, and I'd feel this warm glow of approval, like I'd passed some invisible test. But there was always something underneath. A comment my mother would make offhand, a question that felt like an accusation. "Must be nice," she said once, when I told her about a vacation I was planning to Costa Rica. "Some of us never get to travel." "You could travel, Mom. I'd pay for it, I've offered." "Oh, we don't want your charity." She said it like I'd insulted her. "We're fine, we don't need anything from you." But they did need something. They needed $60,000. I thought about the sacrifices I'd made, the scholarships, the part-time jobs, the years I'd spent eating ramen so I could send money home that they never cashed. I thought about the piano lessons I'd hated and the prom dress I never bought and the vacations I never took because I was too busy working. I thought about the way my mother would look at me sometimes, like she was calculating something, adding up numbers in her head. Now I know what she was adding up. She was keeping a ledger and I was the debt. That night, after the letter, after the phone call, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my bed in my beautiful Chicago apartment with the exposed brick and the skyline view, and I stared at the ceiling and thought about my childhood. The gray Ohio winters, the frozen bus stop, the cold kitchen where I made myself cereal before school because my parents were too tired to get up. I remembered the time I got the flu in 6th grade and had to stay home alone for 3 days because neither of them could miss work. I remembered taking care of Derek when he had a fever of 103, wetting washcloths and checking his temperature every hour while my parents worked their shifts. I was a good daughter. I was a great daughter. I was the golden child who never caused any trouble, never asked for anything, never made a single demand. And they sent me a bill for the privilege of existing. I got up at 3:00 a.m. and stood at my kitchen window, looking out at the city lights, and I thought about what my mother would say if I asked her why. She'd probably tell me it wasn't about love, it was about fairness. That they'd put in the work and deserved to be compensated. That I owed them for every diaper, every piano lesson, every goddamn winter coat. But children don't owe their parents for the basic act of being raised. That's not how families work. That's not how love works. And I knew then the letter wasn't a bill. It was a betrayal. It was my parents telling me that everything I thought we had, all the love and pride and sacrifice, meant nothing to them. It was them drawing a line in the sand and putting me on the other side of it. I drove to Ohio the next morning. I packed a bag, called my boss, and hit the road at 6:00 a.m. 6 hours of flat farmland and billboards for truck stops, and I spent every mile rehearsing what I would say. But I couldn't have known that the confrontation at my parents' kitchen table would be worse than anything I'd imagined. That my father would look at me with cold, dead eyes and tell me that I was a financial obligation, not a daughter. That my brother would smirk from the corner of the room like he was watching a car crash. I couldn't have known that the letter was just the opening shot in a war I never asked to fight, but I was about to find out. The drive from Chicago to my parents' house in Ohio takes exactly 5 hours and 47 minutes on a good day. I know because I've done it 100 times. But this time I didn't stop for gas until I was on fumes, didn't check my phone, didn't even turn on the radio. I just watched the highway markers tick by, 65, 66, 67, and tried to remember how to breathe. I pulled into the driveway at 12:14 p.m. The house looked the same as it always did. The same peeling white siding, the same rusted mailbox leaning to the left, the same plastic flowers in the window box that my mother replaced every spring with the exact same shade of pink. The garage door was open, and inside I could see my father's workbench covered in tools he never used, my brother's beat-up Ford Focus with a dent in the passenger door, and a stack of cardboard boxes that had been there since I was in high school. Nothing had changed, except everything had. I sat in the car for a full 2 minutes, gripping the steering wheel. The engine ticked as it cooled. A neighbor's dog barked twice. I thought about turning around, driving back to Chicago, pretending the letter had never arrived. But I'd already taken the day off work. I'd already told my boss it was a family emergency, and I needed to hear them say it to my face. The front door was unlocked. It was always unlocked. I walked into the living room, and there they were, my mother in her recliner, a crossword puzzle book propped on her lap, a pen in her hand. My father at the kitchen table, reading the paper. The TV was on in the background, some daytime court show with a judge who yelled at people. The same show my mother had watched every afternoon for the last 20 years. "Hi," I said. My mother didn't look up. "Claire, we didn't expect you until later." Later, like I'd called ahead, like this was a planned visit. I came as soon as I could. I held up the letter, the one I'd brought with me. The certified mail envelope was crumpled from my grip. "We need to talk about this." My father folded his newspaper slowly, deliberately, like he was closing a book after finishing a chapter. He set it down on the table and folded his hands. "We figured you'd want to discuss it in person. Sit down." I didn't sit. I stood in the middle of the room, the letter shaking in my hand. "Is this a joke? Because if it is, it's not funny." My mother finally looked up. She had reading glasses perched on her nose, and she peered at me over the top of them the way she used to when I was a kid, and she was about to tell me I'd left my shoes in the hallway. "It's not a joke, Claire. We sent you the invoice. You received it." "It's a bill," I said, "for raising me." "For the cost of raising you," my father corrected. His voice was calm, flat, like he was explaining a math problem. "We kept track. Every expense from the day you were born until you turned 18. Diapers, formula, clothes, school supplies, piano lessons, doctor visits, dental work, summer camp." "I never went to summer camp." "You went to that church retreat when you were 12. That cost $300. And the braces, those were $4,800. Your mother has the receipts." I looked at my mother. She had gone back to her crossword puzzle, filling in a box with the tip of her pen. "Mom, please." "Your father is telling you the truth," she said without looking up. "We itemized everything, it's fair." Fair, the word hit me like a slap. Fair? You're charging me for the privilege of being your daughter? That's not fair, that's insane. My father leaned back in his chair. The wood creaked. "You're 28 years old, Claire. You have a good job, you drive a nice car, you live in a fancy apartment. You can afford to pay us back for what we gave up." "I didn't ask you to give anything up. I didn't ask to be born." "No, but we raised you anyway. And we did a damn good job of it. You got a scholarship, you went to college, you have a career. That didn't happen by magic. We put in the work." I opened my mouth to respond, but a sound stopped me. A snort. From the doorway that led to the basement stairs, Derek. He was leaning against the frame, arms crossed, wearing the same faded Ohio State hoodie he'd worn since high school. His hair was greasy and unwashed, and there was a smear of something on his chin, probably the leftover lunch he'd eaten in the basement. He was smiling, not a nice smile. A smirk, the kind that said he was enjoying every second of this. "Hey, big sister," he said. "Come to pay your dues." "Stay out of this, Derek." "I'm just saying, you're the one who got out. You're the one who made it. Figured you'd be happy to give a little back to the people who made you what you are." I turned back to my parents. "You can't be serious. You have a son who lives in your basement, who doesn't work, who's been draining your savings for years, and you're coming after me." My mother's pen stopped moving. She set the crossword puzzle down on the arm of her recliner and looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. "Derek has different circumstances. Derek has a gambling problem, I know about it. I know you've been paying his debts. I know you took out loans. My father's face went red. That's none of your business. It is when you're sending me a bill to cover it. The room went quiet. The court show on TV was still playing. A woman was screaming at the judge about a broken engagement ring. My mother picked up her crossword again, and I watched her fill in a word with short, angry strokes. Mom, I said, my voice cracking, I'm your daughter. I love you. I've always tried to be what you wanted. I sent money home. I called every Sunday. I came for Thanksgiving and Christmas and Easter and every birthday. I thought we were a family. We are a family. She said it like it was obvious. That's why we're asking you to do the right thing. Asking, you sent a certified letter. You threatened legal action. My father stood up. He was shorter than me, but he had a way of making himself look bigger when he was angry. We meant what we said. Payment due in 30 days. If we don't have the money, we'll see you in court. I laughed. It came out hollow. You'll lose. There's no law that says children have to pay their parents for being raised. We'll see about that. He walked to the kitchen counter, picked up a manila folder, and held it out to me. Here, a copy of the invoice and all the supporting documents. Bank statements, receipts, a ledger, it's all there. You have 30 days. I took the folder. It was heavy. I didn't open it. Derek whistled from the doorway. Better start saving, sis. I looked at my mother one last time. She was back to her crossword puzzle, pen moving steadily, her face blank. She didn't look up. She didn't say goodbye. If you can't pay, she said calmly, we'll see you in court. I walked out. I didn't slam the door. I closed it softly, like I was leaving a stranger's house after a failed sales pitch. The folder was cold in my hands. The sun was bright, and the neighbor's dog was still barking, and I stood on the front porch of the house I grew up in and realized I was completely alone. I drove back to Chicago that same afternoon. I didn't stop for food. I didn't cry. I just drove, the folder on the passenger seat, and thought about the line my mother had drawn. She hadn't said I love you. She hadn't said I'm sorry. She'd said see you in court, and I knew then that they weren't bluffing. They'd already made up their minds. I was a debtor, not a daughter, and they were coming for what they thought I owed. I woke up to my phone vibrating on the nightstand. 6:00 a.m. the display said. Mom, I let it ring. It stopped. Then it started again. 6:02. Mom. I turned over, pulled the pillow over my head. The third time, I sat up and grabbed the phone. My thumb hovered over the green button, but I didn't answer. I watched it ring until it went to voicemail. Then I watched the notification pop up, a new voicemail. Then another. Then a text message. You think you can just ignore us? We raised you better than that. I put the phone face down on the nightstand and tried to go back to sleep. But the vibration kept buzzing against the wood. Buzz, 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 I counted. At 6:14, I got up, padded to the kitchen, and started coffee. The phone buzzed on the counter while I poured cream into my mug. I didn't look at it. I knew exactly who it was. By 7:30, I had 15 missed calls. 11 from Mom, 4 from Dad. 7 text messages. I scrolled through them while I ate a piece of toast. The first few were angry. This isn't over, Claire. Then they got nastier. You're an ungrateful child. A thief. A disappointment. Your father and I are heartbroken. Heartbroken that we raised a daughter who would abandon her family. You owe us, you owe us, you owe us. I blocked both numbers at 7:45. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. At 8:30, my office phone rang. I worked at a small design firm on Michigan Avenue, and I'd given my parents the number years ago for emergencies. They never called it. But that morning, the receptionist, Marisol, patched a call through to my desk. Claire, your mom is online too. She sounds upset. I told Marisol to take a message. 5 minutes later, my phone rang again, and again, and again. By 9:00, Marisol had fielded 7 calls from my mother, each one more frantic than the last. She called me a liar. She called me a coward. She told Marisol that I was hiding from my responsibilities. I asked Marisol to block the number from the office system. She did. At 9:15, my best friend Jess texted me. Hey, your mom just called me. She said you're in trouble and she needs to get in touch with you. Is everything okay? I called Jess immediately. Don't talk to her. She's not okay. She's trying to extort me. What, Claire, what are you talking about? I told her the short version. The invoice, the confrontation, the 40 calls. Jess was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, I'm so sorry. She sounded so normal. She said you were having a breakdown. I'm not having a breakdown. My parents are. We hung up. I sat at my desk staring at my computer screen, unable to focus on the mock-up I was supposed to be reviewing. At 10:00, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from an unknown number. "Claire, this is your mother. I'm using a friend's phone. Please call me. We need to talk about this like adults." I didn't reply. I blocked that number too. At 10:30, my landlord called. Mr. Henderson was a retired postal worker who lived in the unit below mine. He liked to keep things peaceful. "Claire, I got a call from a woman who says she's your mother. She's very concerned about you. She says you're not answering your phone." "I'm fine, Mr. Henderson. Please don't give her any information about me." I didn't, but she's persistent. She said she'll call the police for a wellness check if she doesn't hear from you. I took a deep breath. If she calls the police, they'll find me perfectly fine. She's trying to scare me. "Okay, sweetheart, you take care." I hung up and stared at the wall. My hands were shaking. I had 12 voicemails from my parents now, and I hadn't listened to a single one. The texts kept coming from new numbers. "You can't hide forever. We will find you. You are not above the law." By noon, I had counted 40 missed calls. 40, across my cell, my work line, Jess's phone, and my landlord's. I sat on my couch, phone in my lap, and felt the walls closing in. I had never been hunted before. That's what it felt like. They were tracking me, circling, calling everyone I knew until someone gave them a way in. I called my lawyer. Not the one I'd hire later, a friend from college who'd passed the bar but mostly did contract work. She gave me the name of a family law attorney and told me to document everything. Save screenshots. Keep a log, don't engage, I did all of that. I spent the afternoon making a spreadsheet of every call, every text, every voicemail. I wrote down times and numbers. I saved the voicemails without listening to them. I didn't want to hear their voices. I knew what they would say: guilt, shame, blame, love twisted into a weapon. That evening, I opened the manila folder my father had given me. I hadn't looked at it since I'd thrown it on the passenger seat during the drive home. I spread the papers across my coffee table: receipts for piano lessons, bank statements from 1995, a ledger with my name written in my mother's careful handwriting, each line item a dollar amount. Diapers, $1,200. School lunches, $2,800. Braces, $4,800. It went on for pages. I was halfway through the pile when I found a document that didn't belong. It was a photocopy of a life insurance policy. The policyholder was my mother. The insured was me. The beneficiary was listed as Estate of Claire Mitchell, but in the margin, someone had scribbled in pen, "Mom and Dad get 100%. The face value was $200,000. I read it 3 times. The policy had been opened when I was 16. The premiums were paid annually. The last payment was 6 months ago. My parents had been paying life insurance on me for 12 years, and I never knew. I set the paper down. My hands were steady now. I felt cold, clinical, like I was looking at a crime scene from above. I thought about the $60,000 invoice. I thought about the desperate calls, the threats, the way they'd mobilized against me like I was a target. And I thought about the insurance policy. $200,000 if I died. $60,000 if I paid. They didn't want me to pay the debt. They wanted me to admit I owed it, because if I owed them, then I was still theirs. And if I was still theirs, they could keep the policy. They could keep the hope that one day, maybe, the policy would pay out. Or maybe they just needed cash now. Desperately. Before I found out about the policy and cut them off completely, I looked at the clock. It was 8:00 p.m. My phone was silent. I had blocked every number they could use, but I knew they'd find another way. They always did. I folded the policy document and put it in my purse. Tomorrow, I would find a private investigator. I would find a lawyer. I would find out everything they'd been hiding. But tonight, I sat in the dark of my apartment, the city lights flickering outside my window, and I let myself feel the weight of it. They had been planning for this, for years. They had taken out a policy on my life, and they had been waiting for me to become valuable enough to collect. And now they were desperate, and desperate people do desperate things. The next morning, I called the lawyer my friend had recommended. Her name was Dana Reeves, and she specialized in family law and elder abuse, though I wasn't sure which category my parents fell into. I explained the situation over the phone: the invoice, the calls, the insurance policy. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she said, "Bring everything you have. I'll meet you at my office at noon." I spent the morning photocopying every document: the ledger, the receipts, the insurance policy with the handwritten note in the margin. I also printed my call log and screenshot every text from the unknown numbers. I created a folder labeled Exhibit A and felt like a fraud for even thinking in those terms. Dana's office was in a converted brownstone near Lincoln Park. She was in her 50s, with silver hair cut short and reading glasses perched on her nose. She spread my documents across her desk and read through them in silence. When she got to the insurance policy, she paused. "This is not a standard policy," she said. "The beneficiary designation is irregular. Estate of Claire Mitchell, with a handwritten note directing 100% to your parents, that's not legally binding, but it shows intent." "Intent to what?" "To collect on your death. They've been paying premiums for 12 years. That's roughly $12,000 to $15,000 in total, depending on the rate. They've invested in your death, Claire, and now they're trying to get you to pay them $60,000, which is less than the policy's payout, but it's cash they need immediately." I felt the floor drop out from under me. So they're not trying to get me to die, they're trying to get me to pay them instead. Yes, or at least that's the current plan. But the policy is still active. If anything happened to you, they'd still be the ones to benefit unless you change the beneficiary, which you can do since you're the insured and you're over 18. I nodded. "I want to change it. I want to name myself." "We can do that, but first, we need to understand the full picture. I'd recommend hiring a private investigator to look into their finances. If they're in debt, that explains the desperation. And if they've taken out loans or made other financial moves that could be considered fraud, we might have leverage." She gave me the name of a PI she'd worked with before, Mark Castillo. I called him that afternoon. Mark was a former police detective who'd gone private 10 years ago. He had a calm, methodical voice and asked precise questions. I gave him my parents' full names, their address in Ohio, my brother's name, and any financial details I knew. Their bank was PNC. Their mortgage was through a local credit union. My father had retired from the factory 2 years ago, and my mother still worked part-time at a pharmacy. "Give me a week," Mark said. "I'll have a full report." I spent that week in a fog. I went to work, I did my job, I smiled at my colleagues, and I came home to an empty apartment where the silence felt like a held breath. My parents had stopped calling after I blocked every number they could find, but I knew they weren't done. They were regrouping, plotting. On the 6th day, Mark called. "I've got the report. Can you meet me at Dana's office tomorrow morning?" I was there at 8:00 a.m. Mark laid out a manila folder on the conference table. Inside were bank statements, credit reports, court records, and a handwritten note from a casino in West Virginia. "Your parents have drained their retirement accounts," Mark said, pointing to a series of statements. "They had about $180,000 in a 401k and a pension fund, all withdrawn over the last 2 years. The penalties alone were over $30,000. What did they spend it on? Your brother's gambling debts and their own living expenses. They took out a home equity line of credit for $50,000. That's also gone. They're 3 months behind on the mortgage. The bank has started foreclosure proceedings." I stared at the numbers. "So they're broke." "Completely. They have less than $2,000 in checking. They've been living on credit cards and borrowing from friends. Your brother, Derek, has a documented gambling problem. He's been arrested twice for trespassing at casinos. He owes over $40,000 to various loan sharks." I thought about the smirk on my brother's face at the dinner table. The way he'd leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, watching me squirm. He'd known, he'd been in on it. "The insurance policy," Dana said. "You found it in the folder. How long do you think they've been planning this?" Mark pulled out another document. The policy was opened in 2009 when Claire was 16, but the annual premiums have been paid consistently. The last payment was 6 months ago. That's when they started draining the retirement accounts. I think they realized they were going to lose the house and they needed a way to get cash fast. The policy was their backup plan. If Claire died, they'd get $200,000, but she's alive, so they invented a debt. "They didn't invent it," I said quietly. "They've been planning it for years. The ledger, the itemized costs. They've been tracking every dollar they spent on me since I was born. They were waiting for the right moment to cash in." Dana looked at me. "Claire, you have a strong case for harassment, extortion, and fraudulent misrepresentation. The insurance policy alone is grounds for a lawsuit, but I need to ask you, what do you want to do? I sat back in my chair. The evidence was spread across the table like a body on a slab. My parents' desperation, my brother's addiction, the cold, calculated invoice, the 40 calls, the life insurance policy that turned my existence into a financial instrument. I thought about the little girl who had been the obedient daughter, the straight-A student, the one who took care of everyone. I thought about the scholarships I'd earned, the part-time jobs I'd worked, the clothes I'd bought with my own money. I thought about the moment I'd opened that certified letter, coffee halfway to my lips, and felt my entire past rewritten as a debt. I want to fight, I said. I want to expose them. I want to make sure they can never do this to anyone else. And I want to change that beneficiary. Dana nodded. We'll file a motion to dismiss any potential lawsuit they bring. We'll also file a restraining order for harassment. And we'll contact the insurance company to change the beneficiary. But Claire, if they sue you for the $60,000, we'll have to go to court. Let them sue me, I said. I'll be ready. Mark packed up his files. I'll keep digging. There might be more. They've been moving money around, trying to hide assets. I'll have a full forensic accounting done. I walked out of Dana's office into the Chicago morning. The sun was bright, but I felt cold. I had the evidence. I had the law. I had the truth. And for the first time in weeks, I wasn't afraid. The courthouse in downtown Chicago was a gray limestone building that looked exactly like every other government institution I'd ever seen, cold, indifferent, designed to process people through a system that didn't care about their stories. I stood outside at 8:15 a.m., clutching a leather satchel stuffed with bank statements, screenshots, and the insurance policy documents. My hands were shaking, but my voice was steady when I turned to Dana. I'm ready. She nodded. They're going to try to make you look like the villain, the ungrateful daughter who won't pay her debts. Stick to the facts. Let the evidence speak. We walked through the metal detectors. My parents were already inside the courtroom, sitting on the left side of the gallery. My mother wore a floral blouse I'd bought her for her birthday 3 years ago. My father had on his Sunday suit, the one he used to wear to church before they stopped going. They looked small, desperate, like people who'd bet everything on a hand they thought they could win. My brother Derek wasn't there. I noticed his absence immediately. I wondered where he was, what he was doing. Probably at a casino or hiding from the loan sharks Mark had uncovered. The judge was a woman in her 50s named Judge Harrison. She had sharp eyes and a no-nonsense way of arranging the papers on her bench before she spoke. She called the case, Mitchell versus Mitchell, Small Claims Division. My parents had filed the suit themselves. No lawyer. That was their first mistake. My father stood up and began his opening statement like he was giving a presentation at a PTA meeting. Your Honor, we raised our daughter for 18 years. We fed her, clothed her, paid for her education. We provided a roof over her head. We're not asking for anything unreasonable. We're asking for what we're owed. Judge Harrison looked at him over her reading glasses. Mr. Wheeler, can you point to any legal precedent that requires a child to reimburse their parents for the cost of raising them? It's common sense, he said. Common sense isn't law. Do you have a written contract? We have an invoice, my mother said, standing up beside him. She pulled the folded paper from her purse, the same certified letter I'd opened in my kitchen a month ago. We itemized everything. Diapers, formula, school lunches, piano lessons, winter coats. We even included interest. Judge Harrison took the invoice, scanned it, and set it down. This is a list of expenses, not a contract. Did Claire ever agree to pay these amounts? She knew, my mother said. She knew we were keeping track. Did she sign anything? Silence. I watched my parents shift their weight from foot to foot. My mother's lips pressed into a thin line. My father cleared his throat. No, he admitted. Judge Harrison turned to me. Ms. Mitchell, your response. Dana stood up. Your Honor, the plaintiff has presented no evidence of a contractual agreement. However, the defense has substantial evidence that this claim is not only frivolous but fraudulent. We would like to submit Exhibits A through D. I pulled the documents from my satchel. Dana handed them to the bailiff, who passed them to the judge. Exhibit A is a recording of a conversation between my client and her mother, Mrs. Martha Wheeler, in which Mrs. Wheeler admits this was a loan that was never disclosed to Claire. Exhibit B is a certified copy of a life insurance policy taken out on Claire when she was 16 years old, naming her parents as the sole beneficiaries. Exhibit C is a bank statement showing the policy's payout value of $200,000. Exhibit D is a forensic accounting report from a licensed private investigator detailing the financial condition of the plaintiffs, including the fact that they have drained their retirement accounts, defaulted on their mortgage, and are facing foreclosure. My mother's face went white. That's private. It's evidence, Dana said calmly, and it demonstrates motive. The plaintiffs are in severe financial distress. They have a life insurance policy on their daughter worth $200,000. They cannot collect while she is alive. So they fabricated a debt of $60,000, less than the policy's value, but cash they can access immediately. This is extortion disguised as a family dispute. The judge looked at the insurance policy. She looked at the bank statements. She looked at my parents. Mr. and Mrs. Wheeler, do you deny taking out a life insurance policy on your daughter without her knowledge? My father opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. It was for her protection. Protection from what? If something happened to her, we'd be able to bury her. You took out a $200,000 policy on a 16-year-old girl and named yourselves as beneficiaries. That's not burial insurance. That's an investment in her death. The words hung in the air like smoke. My mother started crying. Not the quiet tears of a woman who'd been wronged, the loud, theatrical sobs of someone who'd been caught. Judge Harrison turned to me. Ms. Mitchell, do you have the recording mentioned in Exhibit A? Yes, Your Honor. I pulled out my phone. It was a voice memo I'd taken during the confrontation at the dinner table. I hit play. My mother's voice filled the courtroom. We're not asking for a gift, Claire. We're asking for a loan you never paid back. My voice, you never told me it was a loan. Her voice, we didn't think we'd have to. The recording stopped. The silence that followed was louder than anything I'd heard all day. Judge Harrison looked at my parents. Mr. and Mrs. Wheeler, do you have any response to this evidence? My father's shoulders sagged. We just wanted what we were owed. You wanted your daughter to pay for her own existence. That's not how the law works. That's not how families work. She picked up her gavel. This court finds that the plaintiffs have failed to provide any legal basis for their claim. The evidence presented by the defendant demonstrates that this lawsuit was brought in bad faith, with the intent to coerce payment through fraudulent misrepresentation. The case is dismissed with prejudice. The plaintiffs are ordered to pay the defendant's legal fees in full. She slammed the gavel. We are adjourned. I sat there for a moment, letting the words sink in, dismissed with prejudice. They couldn't sue me again. They couldn't come back with another invoice, another demand, another attempt to turn my childhood into a debt. My parents were escorted out of the courtroom by a bailiff. My mother was still crying. My father was silent, his face a mask of defeat. I stood up and walked out into the hallway. Dana was beside me, already on the phone with the insurance company to finalize the beneficiary change. And then I heard shouting. I turned around. Derek was standing at the entrance to the courthouse, flanked by two uniformed officers. His hands were cuffed behind his back. His face was red, veins bulging in his neck. You think you've won? He screamed at me. You think this is over? You're dead to us. Dead. One of the officers pushed him forward. Sir, you need to calm down. She ruined us. She ruined everything. I walked closer. What happened, Derek? The officer looked at me. Ma'am, do you know this man? He's my brother. He was arrested outside for contempt of court. He was recording the proceedings on his phone in violation of the judge's orders. And when we approached him, he became aggressive. He's also got outstanding warrants for unpaid gambling debts. Derek lunged toward me. The officers grabbed him, wrestled him to the ground. I watched him thrash and curse, his face pressed against the marble floor. You'll pay for this, he hissed. You'll pay. I looked down at him. I already paid, Derek. I paid my whole life, and I'm done. I turned and walked away. Behind me, I heard the officers reading him his rights. The courthouse doors swung open, and I stepped out into the cold Chicago air. My phone buzzed. A text from Dana. Beneficiary change confirmed. You're the sole beneficiary now. I deleted the voicemails from my parents without listening. I blocked their numbers, their email addresses, every possible way they could reach me. And I went home. 6 months. That's how long it took for my life to become unrecognizable. not in the way my parents would have predicted, not crumbling, not falling apart, not begging them to come back. The opposite. I shed my old life like a snake shedding skin, and underneath I was something they'd never seen coming. The first thing I did was change my number. I stood in the Verizon store on Clark Street, a young guy named Marcus helping me transfer my contacts. He asked if I wanted to port my old number. I said no. I watched him cancel it, watched the screen go dark, and I felt something lift off my chest that had been sitting there since I was 16 years old. The new number ended in 847. I still remember it. I'll never forget it. It was the first thing that was entirely mine. I moved out of my old apartment in Lincoln Park, the one bedroom with the exposed brick and the leaky faucet that my landlord never fixed. I found a place in Logan Square, a two-bedroom with floor-to-ceiling windows and a balcony that faced east. The first morning I woke up there, the sun hit my face at 6:47 a.m. I lay in bed and watched the light crawl across the ceiling, and I thought, this is what peace feels like. Therapy started 2 weeks after the trial. Dr. Patel, a woman in her 50s with silver hair and kind eyes. She asked me on the first session, "What do you want to get out of this?" I said, "I want to stop feeling like I owe everyone something for existing." She nodded like that made perfect sense. And for the first time in my life, someone told me that I didn't have to earn my right to be here. The sessions were hard. We talked about the piano lessons I never wanted, the straight A's I earned because I was terrified of disappointing them, the way I learned to make myself small so I wouldn't be a burden. We talked about my brother, about the way my parents poured everything into him while I poured everything into myself and still felt empty. We talked about the invoice, the insurance policy, the 40 calls a day, and somewhere around session 12 I stopped feeling angry. I just felt free. Work changed too. I'd been at the design firm for 3 years, doing good work but staying quiet, keeping my head down. After the trial, something shifted. I started speaking up in meetings, pitching ideas I'd been too afraid to share. My boss, a woman named Rebecca who'd always been distant, pulled me aside after a presentation and said, "Claire, I don't know what happened to you, but keep doing it." 3 months later, I was promoted to lead designer, my own office, a team of 4 junior designers reporting to me, a salary that made the $60,000 my parents demanded look like pocket change. I thought about that sometimes. The irony. They asked for $60,000. I made that in 6 months. They could have had a daughter who was generous, who would have helped them if they'd asked honestly. Instead, they got nothing. The house in Ohio was foreclosed. I found out from a real estate alert I'd set up on a whim. 2 months after the trial, the bank took it. 1427 Maple Drive. The house where I learned to ride a bike, where I hid in the closet during thunderstorms, where I sat at the kitchen table doing homework while my parents argued about money in the next room. It sold at auction for $87,000, a fraction of what they owed. My parents moved in with my brother's ex-girlfriend. Let me say that again. My brother's ex-girlfriend, a woman named Tricia who lived in a studio apartment above a laundromat in Youngstown. My mother, who once refused to eat at a restaurant that didn't have cloth napkins, was now sharing a bathroom with a woman she'd called trailer trash at Christmas dinner 2 years ago. I found this out through a mutual acquaintance. A cousin who reached out, hesitant, asking if I wanted to know. I said no, but she told me anyway. "They're calling everyone," she said, asking for money. "Your dad tried to borrow from Uncle Rick. Your mom called Aunt Susan crying." I didn't feel sorry for them. I felt something else. Something I hadn't expected. I felt justified. I started the scholarship fund in my spare time. It's small $5,000 per year, one recipient, a high school senior from Ohio who needs to get out of a toxic family situation. I named it the No Debt Scholarship. The application asks one question: describe a time you had to choose between your family's expectations and your own well-being. The first recipient was a girl named Maya from Columbus. She wrote about her father who told her that college was a waste of money for girls, that she should find a husband instead. She applied anyway. She got into Ohio State. She had no way to pay for it. I called her myself, told her the scholarship was hers. She cried on the phone, and I thought about how no one had ever done that for me. How I'd clawed my way out alone, with no safety net, no one telling me I was worth investing in. I decided then that I would be that person for someone else. Dating came later. I didn't plan it. I met him at a coffee shop on Milwaukee Avenue, a guy named David who was reading a book I'd just finished. I made a comment about the ending. He looked up and smiled. 6 months later, he's still here. He knows everything about my family, every ugly detail, and he's never once asked me to reconcile, to forgive, to give them another chance. He says, "Your boundaries are your boundaries." I'm here to support them, not question them. The first time he said that, I cried. The last time I heard from my parents was a voicemail. A number I didn't recognize, probably a burner phone or a friend's. I checked my voicemail out of habit. My mother's voice, thin and reedy, saying, "Claire, please, we're sorry. We don't have anywhere to go. Please just call us back. We need help." I listened to the first 5 seconds, then I deleted it. I didn't block the number. I didn't respond. I just let it go, like letting a balloon drift into the sky and watching it shrink until it's nothing. I'm sitting on my balcony now, looking out at the Chicago skyline. It's October, and the air is crisp, and I'm wearing a sweater I bought with my own money, in an apartment I pay for with my own salary, living a life I built with my own 2 hands. My phone buzzes. A text from David, "Dinner at 7, I'm making your favorite." I smile, I type back, "See you then." I close my eyes and feel the sun on my face. I don't owe anyone a single cent for my existence. I never did.